Hello, everyone. First and foremost, I want to thank you for joining us, and I want to thank ComsFest for partnering with us to host this panel event. Without further ado, let's just jump right in, and I'm going to introduce our moderator, Bonnie Harris. Bonnie Harris is the Vice President of Strategy for MedTech Momentum, an agency that provides integrated marketing communication services for clients in the medical device and healthcare industries. Prior to joining MedTech, Bonnie founded Wax Marketing, a company that is designed to implement IMC strategies for clients across the United States, focused primarily on mid-sized companies in the healthcare, technology, and manufacturing industries. Bonnie has worked in the technology industry. She started in the 1990s, where she eventually worked as an executive overseeing sales, marketing, and operations for multiple profit centers in 10 different regions, including Silicon Valley. She received her master's degree from the West Virginia University IMC program in 2007, and she holds a Bachelor of Science degree in economics from the University of Minnesota. All right, Bonnie, I'll let you take it away.
Thanks, Desiree. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to introduce our panelists first, then we'll be diving into questions. Before I do that, though, I want to encourage people to send questions as we talk. We'll have time at the end to answer questions, but if you've got a burning question or something that's really relevant, we'd like to address those as our panel progresses. So I'll go ahead by beginning with Takara Pierce. Takara T. Pierce is the co-founder and managing partner of Black Alder, having led communications and digital strategies for various electoral, decarceral, and issue-based campaigns. She is passionate about building narrative power for social change. Takara formerly served as communications director for Dream Defenders, a Black woman-led social justice organization advancing a new vision of safety in the state of Florida. Having also served as a digital organizing manager, Takara has created and executed digital campaigns that reached millions of people online across several issue areas. She is well-versed in the development of digital advertising strategy, SMS strategy, email marketing, social media strategy, and more. Prior to her time at Dream Defenders, Takara served in communications-related roles at the Ohio State University's Office of Diversity and Inclusion, the West Virginia Innocence Project, and West Virginia University's Office of University Relations. Takara holds a BA in Philosophy and Public Relations, an MA in Communication Studies, and an MS in Data Marketing Communications, all from WVU. Next, Justin Hoot is the Director of Client Services at SumOdd Pilot. Hi, Justin. Justin is a seasoned and award-winning marketing executive specializing in innovative brand, digital, and interactive experiences with lifestyle, music, and consumer brands. Over the last 12 years, Hoot has led innovative and groundbreaking work for some of the biggest brands and entertainers in the world, including Converse, Chaco, Jordan, Patagonia, Budweiser, Activision, Sonos, VH1, and The Fader, as well as major label recording artists Beyonce, Modest Mouse, Future, Bleachers, and many more. In his current outpost, he serves as the Director of Client Services at SumOdd Pilot, a creative company in Chicago, working alongside both the partners and an expansive creative team to deliver high-caliber branding, campaign, and digital work. Justin is a two-time graduate from WVU, earning both his bachelor's degree and more recently his Master of Science in Integrated Marketing Communications. He resides outside of Chicago with his wife and 3 children. And last but not least, of course, Alex McPherson is the VP Analyst and Director of Business Intelligence at Methods and Mastery, a Fleischmann Hillard company. Across his 12-year career in public relations, social analytics, and brand strategy, he's produced award-winning work, including a 2020 and 2021 Golds for Best Use of Social Media Measurement from the International Association for Measurement and Evaluation of Communication. That's AMEC. In 2021, Methods and Mastery won AMEC's Large Agency of the Year. Alex has served dozens of diverse and innovative brands, including YouTube, Google, McDonald's, IBM, Credit Karma, Nintendo, and the US Navy. And I believe Alex is also a graduate of WVU, is that correct? So welcome to all our Mountaineers on the panel, and I'm excited to get started with our questions about authenticity, which has been coming up so much in our communications, particularly over the past few years, as things become more transparent. Obviously, brands and services need to become more transparent and authentic as well. So I'll kick off with our first question. And Takara, I'm hoping that you'll start by answering this question and get the round going. So first of all, technology has allowed us to manufacture and edit a lot of what we share online, but our audiences are demanding authenticity. And I'm wondering, how do you guys think brands respond to this increased need for transparency and honesty? How are they responding, and how should they respond?
Thanks so much, Bonnie, and thanks again for having me. I'm so grateful to be here. Um, when I think about this question, I think the first step is to really understand who your audience is, not just their age, geography, or engagement patterns, but understanding their values. What do they care about beyond the scope of the brand consumer relationship? And from there, I think it feels really important to build genuine connections, to find the opportunities to tap into what they care about and be consistent in speaking to those values. But I think the caveat there is that those opportunities also have to be true to who the brand presently is. So for example, growing a bottom line, a following, or building support often pushes brands of all kinds to take a particular stand on an issue, perhaps, or hop on a trend, but that stance or trend might not be authentic to the brand. In fact, that's actually inauthenticity. So then what I always ask my clients is, are you clear about what your values are? And are you clear about who your audience is and what their values are? And I think that is the first step in really addressing that call for authenticity amongst our audiences and our consumers. But I'll pass it back to you, Bonnie.
Oh, sure. Alex, Justin, you want to jump in here? I know values are important, as Takara has to say. What else do you think when you look at this today?
Totally, Takara. I really appreciate you starting out with the idea that, the inauthentic way that brands can present themselves when trying to chase a trend or become or chase authenticity. I think it's very apparent. I think it's very challenging it's very hard when you see that happen. So I think you're absolutely right. I think the best way to get there is to understand what do we stand for as a brand. And I think it's okay. I mean, I think it's okay to evolve is what I'm trying to get at. If we look at brands as people, points of view shift, we grow up, we change, we learn new things, we adopt new positions, we lean into certain positions and held beliefs that we had. And so I think it's all right for brands to kind of go through that evolution themselves. And in fact, I would expect that. And that to me feels more natural than a brand that stands for everything, which is to say they stand for not much at all. So.
Oh, good point.
Yeah, I'll add that in essence, like it's not okay anymore essentially to just like be a brand online, to just be this nebulous entity. It is far more about like, what is your persona, like having that persona that your brand has beliefs, and that it's there to be part of sort of the community and the culture of the internet and online these days.
Sure. So what I'm hearing you all say is that it's important to understand your audience from a 360-degree perspective, including their values, right? And that building those connections can only be done with authenticity. And so that leads to my second question, which is really talk a bit more about how you think authenticity really plays into the relationship between a brand and an audience. And sometimes that goes to the individual with our holy grail of audience of one. And I'd also like to throw the question out there. If you have any examples that you've seen, either that you've worked on or that you've just seen in general, where maybe a lack of authenticity has ruined a relationship, or it's really helped repair one, I'd love to hear some of those too.
I can start off a little bit with again just sort of the base level. Like, it creates an engagement point for the brand, more opportunities to make actual, hopefully human and valuable connections. And this can come in a very ways that are again that little bit more surface level, but fun, and also ways that are incredibly more meaningful. So on sort of a surface level standpoint, a brand that I'm always quick to shout out that I just sort of love seeing what they've brought online is Duolingo. And in their own aspect of brand persona, they are huge fans of the musical artist Dua Lipa. And that's great. Like, has a little bit of the play on words. It gives people something to connect on. Anytime there's a new single or album from her, constantly people like Duolingo, you who are a brand, what do you think about this? Because you've made it so apparent of how much of a fan you are. But then on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have this sort of, again, in that serious realm, brands like Ben and Jerry's, who are without hesitation sort of standing against any amount of intolerance that they may see online. And that portion has become incredibly ingrained into their brand as well. And people look for it and value it.
And they even name their products that way,
Exactly.
oftentimes, right?
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, and make real, true donations behind it. It's not just saying something, they are acting it out as well.
Justin, you work with a lot of consumer brands. I'm curious about your perspective on this question.
Totally. Well, I will start with, I taught undergrad a number of years ago, and I used to, the social media class for undergrad. And one of the questions I would ask the class, usually generally early in the process, was, this is probably like mid-aughts at this point, but like, why does Chase Bank need a Twitter account? What do they have to say? Do I need my bank to have a Twitter account? And more importantly, do I need an engineering company that makes a little widget for pipes, in the middle of Ohio? Why do they need an Instagram account? Why do they need a Twitter account? Why do they need a Pinterest account? All these things, right? So I say that to say that I think I find it compelling when brands decide who they are, when they decide how they communicate with folks, and they activate those channels that make sense for them. And it goes back to what Takara kind of said at the beginning of this, being authentic to yourself and knowing your values, knowing who you are, knowing who your audience is, I think really plays into a lot of that. In terms of, I think just falling in line and basically saying we're a brand, so we have to speak on every channel is a bit wasteful and probably not really being genuine and speaking to who your audience is specifically. I think about a brand in Chicago called Riot Fest. It's a festival that we have here. They put on a lot of, looks like a rock festival every year, but their Twitter presence is just completely sardonic. They're just throwing out owns. They own everybody left and right. I mean, they put Wendy's to the test in terms of just that kind of like very hilarious, quick-witted commentary. But that's exactly like who they should be as a brand, right? That's exactly like that fits the ethos of the brand. Some of the brands that I work with personally that I see do a really good job of it, maybe not as sardonically on Twitter. A lot of the brands I work with have a really strong Instagram presence and do a lot of engagement on those platforms. Chaco is one of them that I think has really found a way to meet a rabid audience that loves the product and also loves to engage with them, on that channel specifically. They're a very visual brand. They do a lot of, interesting work. It's an outdoor brand, so it just kind of lends itself to just beautiful photography and commentary on, on both the product and both the lifestyle that they promote. So,
Takara?
Well, I think one of the things is that when you're an authentic brand, it also builds loyalty and resilience in moments of potential downswing. I think I've had a few clients in situations where there was a lot of public outrage, perhaps about something that they said or something that they did, or something that went wrong during a particular campaign. But because they had built such a strong foundation in the relationships that they have with their audience, because there is so much authenticity, there was so much more of a public willingness to meet them back where they are and to accept the accountability and to accept whatever public apology maybe perhaps that they wanted to give, because that foundation of authenticity had been established. So I think that's the last thing that I can add. Authenticity can also build brand resilience, brand loyalty, and you'll just have that really strong, meaningful relationship.
I was going to follow up with a question to you, Takara, too, because we see a lot of this, particularly with midterm elections coming up, where we see some of our public leaders being very transparent and authentic, and others kind of doubling down, if you know what I mean. Like they're, instead of coming back and explaining what happened in a transparent way. They're kind of saying things to sort of justify what they've done or said. And what's your counsel to them? I mean, how do you kind of break through that and explain what the impact of that is?
Yeah, I think the first thing I say is that people see right through it immediately.
Mhm. Right.
And I also think that when we have conversations publicly about accountability, something that's really important to name and to acknowledge is that other people cannot hold us accountable. Only we can hold ourselves accountable. And that's truly authenticity. Somebody has to be able to see, wow, what I did was actually unacceptable. And I actually want to take accountability for this versus the public throwing tomatoes and saying, I'm going to punish you, until you do the right thing. And they're like, oh, I'm tired of, all these tomatoes. Okay. There's a big difference between I simply don't want to be punished anymore and I'm actually accountable. And I think that there's a really, really, really important messaging opportunity there. The narrative has to be sharp, it has to be right, and it has to be authentic. So the ways that we think about and language and message accountability, it has to be sharp and strategic.
And I liked what you said is only we can take accountability. I think that was a really, really important point. You can't crowdsource your own authenticity, can you? I wanted to ask a follow-up question for Justin and Alex too. And one of the things you touched on was humor. And I think that I've seen humor fall flat quite a bit when people are trying to be authentic, but it's not truly their brand. Do either of you want to say something further about how do we handle that? I mean, everybody wants to be Wendy's, but we all can't be Wendy's, right?
That's very true. We all can't be Wendy's, correct? I think first it takes off. First, it starts with making sure you have the right talent in the room, or that you're working with the right talented people. It starts with testing and focus groups, and it's an interesting topic about authenticity, and I think there's a question around this a little later in the mix. But the true art of authenticity is, I think, being truer to your values. I think reads authentic versus. Did we film this and unedit it? Did we write this off the cuff? Some of the strongest and smartest brands that I know put in a ton of effort and energy to create those relationships with consumers and to create that experience for consumers. And it is very much not an off the cuff situation. It is like a tried and true practice. In the same way when Steph Curry gets the ball at the 3-point line, that's not he's not just throwing it up there. You know what I mean? It's well practiced. He knows exactly how to sink that basket from anywhere on the floor. I think brands have to do the same thing. It appears authentic. It appears in the moment. It appears quick, but it is really the effort and the energy of a strong brand presence that knows who they are, knows how to talk, has gamed this out a few different times. And that what we experience as authenticity is actually, I'm not going to call it rehearsed, but it's a well practiced and thoughtful exercise. So
that mantra of be consistent, be persistent, which is something that I always say. Alex, did you have anything to add there? Or?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say it truly does come back to being strategic and make sure you're asking yourselves the right questions. Oftentimes you might think the question is, how can we sell our product to more people? But a better question is, what do people want from us? Which hopefully the answer becomes, their product, whatever your end sort of goal is. But it's also like, what are people's needs in the sort of internet environment these days? Because everybody, I feel like, has gone through quite a bit in these times. So sometimes it is humor to alleviate that. Sometimes it's some what I would call like co-celebration, celebrating someone else's a good happenstance. One example of that, a client that I work with, Credit Karma, they've made such important strategic shifts as they've been sort of identifying the ways to be there in new ways for their own for their own customers. One example of that with Credit Karma is they want to create good karma as sort of a pillar of their brand. So they're looking for people who are online and they're maybe mentioning like, hey, I just checked my Credit Karma and my credit score has just improved. And they will like engage with that authentically, because the whole value behind the brand is we are authentically there for you to help you along your journey and celebrate you and celebrate with you as good things happen.
I think a really important point that we should let land, particularly for brands who are newer to social media, is that pivot that you just mentioned, Alex, of it's not what can we sell to them, it's what do people want from us? What a great question to ask at the beginning of developing any strategy there. So the next question's kind of fun because we're going to move to, and I get this question all the time, should we be on TikTok, right? And TikTok is kind of exploding on the scene, or has exploded on the scene in terms of social media and its importance and its presence. So I'm wondering, so this is a platform that really encourages the sharing of what Justin was talking about, like raw, unedited video. It doesn't have to be pretty. It's really leading the way, I think, partially for that reason with authentic content. So where do you see TikTok fitting in terms of the opportunities for brands to be more authentic? Where shouldn't it be? I'll throw that out to the group and see who wants to hit that channel specific question first.
I can jump on this one, guys.
Great.
I have a bit of an interesting point of view on this, Bonnie. I think I'm not shocked that you're getting that question. It's a question we kind of toss around in the office here quite a bit. So I'll just start with thinking about TikTok. There's a gentleman that I do a lot of reading and listening to named Professor Scott Galloway, for those of you that are familiar or not familiar. Also has a podcast called Pivot and a podcast called The Prop G Show and a newsletter called No Mercy, No Malice. He writes a little bit about TikTok in terms of thinking less of TikTok as a social media channel and more as a media company in of itself. If you look at the hours spent on it, it is very much in competition with the hours that we spend streaming shows on Netflix, Hulu, etc. It is taking up an inordinate amount of our time and place in our society and in kind of our entertainment media consumption. So I think one thing to think about is to think of it less as a normal social media channel and more to think about it as almost like a platform, a media platform in its own right? So that's the one lens I'd like to put on this. The second lens I'd like to put on this is a conversation I have with my coworkers, which is, do you want to be a brand on TikTok, or do you want to be a brand that's talked about on TikTok? And I think the answer to that is, there's a real danger in showing up as a brand on TikTok and being the Steve Buscemi meme, hello, fellow kids, right? Or there's the idea that you are talked about consistently and constantly on TikTok by these creators, by these platformers. There's a client of mine called RevCook who, out of nowhere, they have this really kind of advanced toaster. It's kind of cool. It's really cool. I don't have a toaster, but if I did, this would be the one that I would get. Shameless plug. But they found that all of a sudden, all these creators on TikTok were using their technology, and all of a sudden they found they were trending on TikTok, which is an amazing place to be, because you're basically getting co-signed by all of this talent, all these creators who are, again, taking up that inordinate amount of viewing time. It's an opportunity for you as a brand to sort of participate in that, follow along that, possibly look into who are some of these creators with a larger audience that you might want to co-sign or work with directly, versus trying to show up and compete with the creators who are really leaning into the platform themselves. So that's sort of my stance on TikTok. Better to be talked about on TikTok than to be on TikTok as a brand. And although I do think TikTok has made it kind of palatable for some brands to be on there via their challenges, from a media perspective, as a channel, they really offer some great products. I don't think it's right for every brand by any stretch of the imagination, but there are some really cool opportunities for brands on there.
Justin, while the other panelists answer, we have a question. If you could please put the names or any links that you have to some of the podcasts and newsletters that you just mentioned the chat, that would be great. Who wants to pick up the TikTok topic? That's not easy to say.
I'm happy to, really quick.
Great.
Yeah, I have a client that I'm really excited to work with. She's an Emmy Award-winning producer. She just won her Emmy actually this year. And she's like, I really want to be on TikTok, but I'm really, really intimidated, and I don't have the capacity on my team to like maintain a cadence that would like help me grow a following and have a lot of engagement. And kind of to Justin's point, I said there's so many opportunities to be on TikTok. You don't have to even have an account yourself. We can create an influencer relation strategy where like you're just going on other folks' accounts and talking with them, or you're offering them content to share on your behalf. TikTok also has a great ad platform that you don't even really have to have an account for, or account that you consistently post on. So there are a ton of opportunities on TikTok, and I know many of the clients that I work with, they're small shops and they don't have huge social media teams to help them kind of sustain the flow that would be required to grow a large following or have a lot of engagement. So there are many avenues that you can engage on TikTok without the pressure of, maintaining a huge platform.
Great.
Yeah, and I'll add some 2 cents that TikTok, it is first of all, as an analyst, so hard to measure these days. Hopefully things will get further there, but it can be a bit of a challenge. But I think that's the fun in some ways of social media, that like those of us who are in that sort of industry, like don't forget that this stuff is a little bit of fun too. I mean, TikTok is a great opportunity now to like do less but try more. The market is reasonably quickly moving away from the need for everything to be so flashy and so overproduced. And I think one of my clients, IBM, have begun hitting their stride with content that is sort of showcasing who are the people at IBM. What are interesting stories behind some of their employees? What's some interesting like behind the scenes? Like, what does a server room actually look like? Is that day in the life sort of fun for other people to learn about? As Justin sort of called out, TikTok really it works best as a media company in some ways. And you have shows like on Netflix, like Explained, and just documentaries, obviously taking off so well. You can do types of content like that as well. What are things that work best for media? It is, often that humor, it is teaching, it is meeting people where they are and how they're feeling in that moment. And TikTok creates a really helpful opportunity for that. It isn't for every brand, but it can be for some if you really think strategically about, again, what do consumers want from me and how can I meet them there?
One of the things that occurred to me as you were all talking about the fact that you don't have to have a TikTok account to take advantage of it. But just like any other relationship that you might have, with a celebrity, or we saw this a lot with YouTubers. If you want to maintain the authenticity of your brand, you have to make sure that those you use as an influencer are maintaining their own authenticity. Does anybody have any tips about how you really kind of select in this sort of Wild West social media where so much is raw and unedited? How do you kind of vet that? How do you ensure that? We had a question about risk in our chats, and I think it was a good one, because I see, possibly just as a person who did PR for a long time, I see some risks with associating with some of these TikTokers.
Yes, you're not wrong about that. And there is a lot of risk on that. I mean, I guess I would say in a lot of ways you get what you pay for. If you want to have a transactional relationship with an influencer and you're very transparent about, I want that reach, or I want that suspected reach, you can certainly buy content and cosigns that feel and look that way, right? But I think a lot of it has to do with striking up those relationships with influencers that want to create content around your brand or alongside your brand. But I think a lot of it starts with where are they at? Are they the kind of person that puts their name on anything? Do they present well? Do they really believe in a product that they're presenting? Or is it just, again, it's pretty apparent, I think, and maybe this is just being purely jaded at this point after 15 years in the industry, but it's pretty transparent when somebody is heart's not in it, when somebody doesn't really care. So I, blanket avoid those influencers and any recommendations to my clients.
So I think what you're saying is it's not just the reach, it's kind of that, again, it goes back to sort of the values. So look at if the values align with that influencer. And anybody else have something to say about that, or
Yeah,
how you
I'll
kind
make
of
an ad
choose
real quick.
those?
Yeah,
Okay.
something that I saw recently. It was so in Justin's point, it's not also just like, are they the right, background, all that. It's truly like, is this what my audience sometimes is also expecting of me already as the company? This example, a different Riot, so Riot Games, a video game company behind League of Legends and others. They recently partnered with Lil Nas X, who you think, huge, popular, sort of again, pop music star these days. Incredibly, they have a good bit of controversy in different places behind them, but that's also a little bit of their own brand. And you think these two together would make a good mix for what was the sort of every global competition League of Legends has. They have somebody make a soundtrack for them. A lot of that in previous times has been done somewhat in-house. Sometimes they've shopped it out to others. And this time they partnered with Lil Nas X. And it honestly didn't work super well for Riot Games. And it was nothing that necessarily Lil Nas X did bad. It was more in the element of, you could tell in some of it, there might have been a little bit of a tension between what League of Legends wanted from Lil Nas X, what he was able to bring to the table. Some of it was also like the song was a bit slower than the usually energetic, like highly sort of Pirates of the Caribbean style epic soundtrack that people are used to get them hyped up for this kind of thing. And their audience let them hear that they were just sort of, nothing against Lil Nas X, but we're kind of disappointed that this didn't bring the energy, the passion that we typically feel behind these sort of global events each year. And it just didn't quite work because it didn't perfectly hit that note of authentic resonance between the two brands themselves, Lil Nas and League of Legends.
Interesting. Takara, did you have anything you wanted to add, or?
Yeah, I think, when we build out influencer relation strategies at Black Alder, we start every process with both a social listening analysis and a narrative weather report. And what that information does for us is it gives us real insight into what the online conversations about these influencers are at present and how they align or perhaps don't align with the goals and values of our client. And I think that's a really important place for us to start because, at face value, we can take a look at who these influencers are and maybe look at a little bit of their content, make an immediate judgment and say, nope, no, we don't need to work with them. But I think especially when you're working with micro influencers and macro influencers, it's really important to see what their audience, what their values are, their audience's values are, how they are discussed online, how they're viewed online, what the sentiment is about them online. So that's what I'll offer to this particular question is, there are a ton of tools available to us online to give us a lot of the data that we need to make really informed decisions about who we're working with. Right.
Well, we just rounded out the bottom of the hour, so we're at the second half of our questions too. I want to encourage our the people viewing to throw their questions in the chat. We're seeing a few of those now, and we'll get to them in a minute. But in the second half here, we're going to shift to personal branding, and I want to know how you guys feel that this sort of authenticity boom, if you will, affects the way that we should present ourselves and our personal brand online. And if you could talk to some specific channels in your answers, LinkedIn, Twitter, obviously your own personal website. So we've touched on this a bit in your answers before, but let's really dive into how, as people, personally, professionally, we can maintain authenticity and why that matters.
I can start a little bit here. Someone in the chat had mentioned risk, which I think is a huge factor in this, especially when it comes to that sort of personal aspect. How much of doing certain things feels like a risk to you? But on the other end, how much do you trust your own audience or even strangers in some ways? I will admit, this year I've hit a sort of personal renaissance within this aspect where, like, over the course of like life and work and just the onslaught of, let's see, health, political, financial, economic, all of these crises that I think people have been, running into these past several years. I was feeling very tired, we'll say. And I think others can resonate with the fact that, like, we're all feeling a bit tired these days. And so from a work standpoint, I was talking to some colleagues, and we were also sharing a bit about how things were going. So I started sharing more myself around my own struggles with depression and anxiety. And then in a different front, I came out admitting that I prefer using different pronouns than the norm. I prefer they, them pronouns. And in doing that with colleagues first, where I had the most sort of aspect of trust, at least for me, I actually got a lot of really nice reception back. I could feel that that was actually, people were coming to me saying that that was meaningful, that someone was willing to say where they were, how they were feeling about things. And so I started sharing a little bit more about myself on LinkedIn as well. And same sort of thing kept happening, where I think people are seeking this aspect of community. And in that way, one, I felt more comfortable and a little bit more empowered for myself. Not everybody's at the same place in their own journey, and you have to find what is your right place. But I gauged that difference between risk and then trust, and then found for myself that let me put some of this trust out there into the world. Some people are needing to hear it. And then on the other spectrum, I'm free in a bit of a way. I actually feel more comfortable and authentic in myself because I've put that trust out there.
Thanks. Thanks for sharing that, Alex. I think that's a really powerful example. As we continue to answer this question, there's a chat question from Mike that might be relevant in your answers too, which is, when do you recommend taking down content that doesn't resonate or falls flat for an individual brand? And what's that process to decide whether to take it off, and kind of what are the tipping points? So as we go forward, thinking about personal branding and authenticity, let's keep that question in mind in our answers if we can. Takara or Justin, anybody want to pick this one up?
I'm happy to speak to it a bit and then pass it over to you, Justin. Um, I love what Alex said about community, because I resonate so deeply with that, and I just so agree, and I'm so aligned with that thought process. My sister and I, when we launched our firm, we felt it was really important to share our personal stories as a way to connect with the people we work with, our personal audiences within our networks, and even just thinking psychologically about vulnerability, or the psychology of vulnerability. It really truly does create space for for community, and it empowers other people also to be authentic because they're seeing you be authentic. And I think we're actually exiting this, and I love this question too because it requires so much nuance in your answer, and it really depends on who you're asking. But I think that we're exiting this digital era of required perfection. We're seeing a lot of people even be really critical of the use of filters, although I'm like, use a filter, do what you have to do.
Mm-hmm.
But we're seeing people do that, and we're seeing a lot of people lean into vulnerability and storytelling as a way to connect with their following. And I think now we're ushering in an era where people are really appreciate and can understand the value of being open and being vulnerable and telling your story, and using storytelling as a tool to connect with your audience. And again, it requires so much nuance. I think it depends on who you ask, but I think we're entering, hopefully, maybe I'm overly optimistic, just this new era where people can just be who they are online, and that will be well received.
Love that.
Cool. I have a little bit of a counterpoint to this, and this also just might be my age showing. So nobody call me a boomer. I'm not there yet, but I tend to actually be a little more. I don't feel any pressure at all to have a public persona beyond a very select few channels. One of which is my LinkedIn. The other one, which is just a website. I keep everything else pretty private as far as like my personal life. If you know me, you get a peek behind the curtain, get an opportunity to, come along for the ride on my Instagram, meet my children, the things that I'm interested in, my family's interested in. But as far as sharing that stuff publicly, I really kind of keep work to work. And I feel strongly about that in terms of, my presentation of myself online. I don't feel the need to have to produce that kind of content or kind of relate to human beings. And I also just sort of, for me, my job is a lot easier if I sort of am able to, I guess, structure how I comment on things and what I share with people a little more curated, I guess I would say, and that's not to say that I'm not authentic or that I'm not, um, true to myself when I speak with people, when I engage with people, but I certainly don't feel any pressure to communicate or be vulnerable or to share or to overshare. And again, I think that might be a little bit generational, but it also could just be me personally. I feel I'm a little more of a private human being. So I would just urge the others on the call or the others listening, you know what I mean? I think it really has to work for you. You know what I mean? If you're comfortable kind of putting yourself out there, there's a lot of opportunities to do so. And if you're not, I just, I wouldn't feel overly pressured to do so if
I
that's not
think
who
that,
you are as a person. So
yeah, that's a great answer. And it actually is just the most amazing segue into my next question. So I'm going to go straight there, which is, how do we define that line between authenticity and personal privacy? Maureen wrote that in many ways, authenticity and vulnerability are inextricable. And I love that line. But I think it's also true that you have to be, if we talk about our own values, we have to align with those. So how can people kind of decide this? Takara, what do you think? You work a lot with individuals in the public eye, so curious as to your perspective.
I think my perspective really aligns with what Justin named earlier, and that it really depends on the individual. It depends on the brand. It depends on the individual. I can just give a quick example. There is an influencer, admittedly an influencer that I follow. She has a really successful skincare and sunglass company, and she's also been incredibly public about her issues with infertility. And she's taken her followers along that journey, and she's been incredibly vulnerable and dealt with a lot of trauma very, very publicly. And that level of vulnerability and that level of authenticity, it grew her following tremendously. And then there was a point where she was donating, I think, like 50% of the proceeds for her sunglasses company to a cause that deals with infertility issues. And she said, she named on an IG Live one day that that level of vulnerability and authenticity was really what helped her brand to grow. I don't necessarily think that that is at all a roadmap. That is not at all something that can be replicated. I don't think it's something that somebody else should look at and say, hey, I also deal with infertility. Let me put all my business out in the street and, do the same thing. I think it really has to be authentic. It has to feel right to the person who's doing it. It has to feel right for the brand. And I don't really think that there's a formula for it necessarily.
I think your point too, she probably didn't do that with having a huge reach as her goal, right? That probably wasn't a strategy. It was just what felt right to her as she was launching, as she was talking to her audiences. And it goes back to our conversation about audiences too. What do they want from us? Alex's question on that. And,
Yeah. And
one of the, go ahead, Alex.
I was just say real quick, I think the question she asked herself there, which is also a hugely important question as a person, is like, what do I need for myself? Because it's okay to be, it's good to be in some ways a little bit selfish, to understand what you need. And if you happen to get an audience after it, amazing, especially if you're creating a positive community where you can support others who are going through the similar challenges. But she that wasn't the goal going in. It was something for herself, which I think is phenomenal in that regard.
Let's go back to Mike's question, which was, how do you decide when to take something down? Does anybody want to take a stab at that one?
I'm a big fan of a day zero. Mike, to answer your question specifically, I think there's kind of a, the nice thing, and I mentioned this earlier, people change, brands change. If we look at brands as needing to have a personality, it's okay to sort of show up and say, it's a new year, it's a new me. This is what I'm doing from here on out. I think there's some other strategies that you can do with that though, Mike, if you're not ready for like a day zero moment. There's like a slow transition into kind of like walking away from content that you had or presented into some newer content that you do share. So there's a bit of a historical record, and you can almost like watch that change or that transition happen kind of naturally. It really depends, I think, on, I don't recommend either of those strategies without a really clear roadmap on what the next months, or the way forward is on content, right? I think either one of those can kind of get you into a bit of a problem area, and I mentioned this earlier. The idea of authenticity just being kind of snapped out of thin air is a real hang up that I have with the perception of it, because I think it actually is a much more arduous process to kind of create work and communications that lean on and build on the values that you've established for yourself and the values that you understand from your audience. So if the strategy is not there, if the plan to produce content in that realm is not there, I think any sort of transition, from the old to the new can be can be tricky. So I recommend a lot of preparedness, and again, either a day zero moment or sort of a slower transition. You know what I mean? Whether it's a month or a couple weeks. So
Okay, good counsel.
I'll add real quickly that I think there's an aspect there that is this, whether it's an individual piece of content or something that I've done, creating more harm for good than people? If it is, assess, like, is that truly something that I should come back on and maybe admit fault for? That type of transparency can be good as well. Although there are, there's considerations with, too much admitting fault in, where we can feel very tied up in a marketplace. Taylor Swift right now is going through this. One of her songs, Antihero, has been called out for having potentially fat phobia lyrics incorporated into this. Beyonce handled something like this a little bit earlier, and where she actually changed some lyrics in her songs because she felt it was important to do so. But that's where, for instance, Taylor Swift right now has just got to ask herself, me as a person, being a role model for so many, is it more important for me to admit that type of fault, potentially for her compromising where she was trying to come from with her artistry, but she is that role model? Are those lyrics causing harm? And if so, is that then the right step for herself, her brand, to make amends?
Wow, it's a really good point and a very relevant example. Takara, do you have anything else to add, especially about the risk of some of this authenticity too? I'm curious if you have anything to say about when to really remediate those situations.
Yeah, I think just echoing everything Alex and Justin already named, but I do think it comes back to what we discussed at the beginning of the conversation, where we are really evaluating how our values and the values of the people that are consuming our content, or who are our audience, how are they aligning or misaligning, and making a really sharp assessment from there. But I was also going to offer a very similar example to the one that Alex offered, where Beyonce changed the lyrics. So did Lizzo, and Lizzo handled it with a lot of grace. And simply made a tweet, changed the lyric. It was done, not talked about anymore. And the people who had criticized her and were offered a very intense criticism also were really grateful to Lizzo. Like, Lizzo, this is a really great example of how you can remedy an issue like this. Take accountability, move on. And I think, you're always going to have your internet trolls. You're always going to have your people who are never going to be satisfied, no matter how you remedy something. But I do think it offered a really, really good example of how you can kind of address those kinds of issues. And I'm happy to drop an article in the chat if folks want to read further.
I think that would be great. And I think a lot of companies are very leery of authenticity or sharing, particularly leaders within the company sharing too many private things. For that reason, they might step on something that they're not aware of that is a sensitive issue. What do you guys say about those companies that know they need to be more authentic, but they have that hesitancy because there's a lot of fear there? What if this happens? What if we have this kind of a crisis? Any sort of counsel? And when you look at sort of shifting a brand and their voice, what sorts of things do you counsel your clients up, or what sorts of things do you think about?
Well, sorry, Alex, you jump in. You got it. Okay. I guess to start with, you know, I want to live in a world where people are allowed to be fearless, and I want brands to be fearless in their communications. And I want people to, I think that's part of being authentic. You know, I also hope to live in a culture that has done an amazing job at canceling people, but I'd love to see an opportunity to live in a culture where we actually build people back up. I think every great hero's journey kind of starts with a misstep, starts with a mistake being made, starts with, you know, circumstances and changing and growth, you know. So I'm interested in finding a way back to a place where not only do we cancel people, but we're also able to bring them back into our communities and build them back up, you know, with, of course, through growth and change, not like an overnight situation, but you know, I want the people that I work with and the clients that I work with to be fearless in who they are and lean into who they are. But not to say they should be insensitive or willingly insensitive, but at the same time, mistakes are going to happen, you know. And is it a mistake you can't come back from, or is it one that you know you'll always kind of have room for growth and change and an opportunity to learn something new, which I think you know, a lot of what we're seeing, not everyone, but I would say there are a lot of brands and leaders of brands that might, you know, step in it or make a mistake, you know what I mean? But it's also an opportunity for them to be educated. So
Okay.
that's my counsel.
Yeah, that buzzword we keep coming back to is community, and it's such the right one, because you have to look at, like, who is my community now? Who is my aspirational community? Who do I want it to become? What can I do that contributes to it and hopefully creates more good within that community? And on the flip side of transparency, there are entire communities these days which are built on not being transparent, not admitting fault. And I personally hope that the market doesn't hit towards that. But that is the right move for those that have the community like that. But I think it's also us as professionals in the industry, it's up to us to hopefully bring our own positive values to these clients we work for, to these other organizations, making sure that, you know, in the context of, if I'm working with YouTube and helping them work on a Pride report, that it's not just my voice. I'm actively thinking of what are our other authentic voices who have more knowledge, more experience in these communities than I do. How can I crowdsource that in also a responsible way to make sure that, again, if YouTube is doing this thing where they want to make contributions, they want to create social good, how can I help them as well hit that pulse of authenticity?
Right. And that kind of segues us also into our last question, which is really your top advice. If you had like one or two points you would make to a brand or a person to how to use authenticity to really leverage this trend with consumers, where they're going to brands that share their values, that have a social bottom line, you know, that type of thing is becoming increasingly important. I mean, do you have just a couple of, you know, we've got 5 minutes left or 4 minutes left, just a couple of strong points that you always say to a client? I think Takara, if you want to start that one. And also if you have any examples of how, as a consumer, you may have shifted yourself because of something that you saw.
I think something I would say is that you cannot manufacture authenticity. It has to, you have to, your actions have to align with what you're saying your values are. And a really clear example, Justin, I heard you say you work with Patagonia. I'm a huge Patagonia fan. I'm also a huge outdoorsy and very much an environmental justice type person. And Patagonia is a brand who's like radically transformed after conversations with community, after conversations with the public, with their audience. They have radically transformed how they make their products, how they spend their money. And they fundamentally understand that the answer to climate change is systems change. And they're practicing that internally, and they're practicing that in the way that they communicate with the outside world. And that means so much to me as a consumer, because I believe that fundamental value, I believe that that's true across the board. And so to witness that as a consumer, and to follow them and consume their content as well, not just their posts, that has had a huge impact on me, and especially the way that I think about big brands, which I think that's often where these conversations are centered is around big brands. They have the most visibility, the most money, the most access, and the most resources. So I think that's what I would say. You can't manufacture authenticity. It has to be genuine. It has to be real.
Okay, Alex, I'm going to call on you. Your point.
Ooh,
Or-
okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm just always pull things up that it is, who do you see? Who do you want to be? Where do you feel comfortable as a person or as a brand, judging that sort of trust and risk across the whole course of things? And ideally just working to, bring more of yourself, I guess, into the world. If something doesn't work out, go ahead and admit that, well, this didn't land as well as I thought it did. That kind of personality, that kind of genuineness might work as well.
Great. Humility, it sounds like. Justin?
Yes, thank you. I'll just two quick things. One, Takara, I'll take the bait on Patagonia, and I will just say your experience with Patagonia cost a lot of money and a ton of investment in living those values. And I'm dead serious. So I've had several brands come to us and say, we want to start a program like Patagonia. And the question is, well, what are you willing to give up internally? What are you willing to change internally as a brand? What are you willing to invest in that? So, again, we're talking about authenticity. Being authentic, it costs a lot of money to live into those values. The other thing, just back to the question at hand, Bonnie, what I would say is my recommendation to brands is that it's an evolution, it's a change. Kind of find out where you are today, and then work towards where you want to get to. And I don't really believe in like there is a before and an after as much as there is a progression. And I think it's okay. I think a business's number one job is to stay in business. So if you can build a business that's profitable and takes care of yourself and your employees and is good for the consumers, it doesn't have to be perfect today, but if you'd like it to be perfect, what are the steps that you can take to get there, and how can you communicate those steps along the way? So
Great. So I'll just summarize by I think the comments that you made are you can't manufacture authenticity. You have to be yourself and take the risk of being vulnerable and see where it lands. And it's a journey. It's not an end result. So we're at the top of the hour. I just I took so many notes myself, and I'm sure the people listening did too. So thank you to our panelists. This was an amazing hour for me, and I'm sure everyone listening. I'm going to throw it back to Desiree so she can bring us home.
Yeah, I just wanted to extend a thank you to Bonnie, Takara, Alex, Justin for joining us today and exploring this trend in our industry. Also, a big thanks to CommsFest again for partnering with us, and thank you to all of you who joined us today. So this was a great discussion. Thank you guys a lot.
Thanks, everyone.
thanks, guys.
Thanks. Goodbye.